At Christmas dinner, right in front of our dad and a room full of family, my sister raised her glass and said, "Some of us find love, others just finance it." And then she looked directly at me. She didn't know I had a folder under the table, one that proved I paid over $87,000 for our father's medical care, while she used family funds to lease a brand new Tesla. "Hi, I'm Rachel. I've spent most of my life being the quiet one, but that night I didn't raise my voice. I just handed over the receipts. And by midnight, our dad had changed his will. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. They said Vanessa planned the Christmas dinner, but I knew better the moment I saw the seating chart. It wasn't the food, the tablecloths, or even the candlelight. It was the quiet way she placed me near the hallway, far from the center of the room, like I'd somehow requested the shadows. That moment hadn't arrived yet, but the signs had been there, soft and constant, like background noise you only notice when everything else stops. I'd always had a quiet seat in the Langley family, at the edge of photos, the corner of conversations, the end of long tables. It wasn't bitterness. Not really. Just fact. It was late October when I stopped by Dad's house. The sky had turned that muted gray Asheville Carries in fall, and I was still in my work cardigan, a thrifted blue thing with a missing button. The air smelled like wet pine and rust, and Dad's porch creaked the same way it had when I was 13, rushing in after school with wet socks and watercolor-stained fingers. He wasn't surprised to see me, he rarely was. "You just missed the nurse," he said, not looking up from his crossword. "She said, I'm doing fine. Strong heart." I nodded, setting down a canvas bag of groceries on the kitchen counter. I wasn't here to argue about his heart. I was here because of the bills. They were stacked neatly under a magnet shaped like a trout. Unopened, unsorted, but not hidden. Oncology, imaging, cardiology. It was all there, addressed to Gerald Langley in bold, unfriendly print. I flipped through them silently, noting the dates. 6 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 2 days ago. "You know these haven't been paid," I said, keeping my tone flat. He shrugged, circled a word in the crossword. "I'm working it out with insurance." "They already denied it." "Then I'll appeal." I turned one of the envelopes around, showing him the red stamp across the top. Final notice. He sighed but didn't meet my eyes. "I told Vanessa to look into it. She said she'd figure something out." Of course she did. I didn't say more. I gathered the bills back into a pile, pressed them flat, and slid them into my bag beside the apples and almond milk. Dad returned to his puzzle, mumbling something about a 4-letter word for burden. That evening, I stood in our kitchen with the bills spread out beside the sink, the window cracked open to let out the burnt cinnamon smell of a forgotten candle. David leaned against the counter behind me, reading through the hospital codes with that quiet, focused frown he wore whenever something didn't sit right. He didn't ask why I hadn't told Dad I'd already paid off over $87,000 in post-stroke care the year before. He knew. He'd watched me make the payments, first the smaller ones, then the ones I couldn't ignore. I drained a savings account I started when I was 26, cashed a CD early, and adjusted my retirement plan. I hadn't told anyone, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to see how little it mattered to the people it was for. David reached for a dish towel and wiped his hands. "We can cover this round, too, if you want." I nodded, then went back to unloading the groceries. I didn't say thank you. Between us, it was already understood. The next afternoon, I returned to Dad's with a container of soup and an envelope addressed to the hospital's billing office. As I climbed the porch steps, a sleek white car pulled into the driveway. The logo caught the sunlight. Tesla. Vanessa stepped out like she'd floated in. Hair smooth and shiny, heels clicking against the pavement, a phone in one hand and designer sunglasses in the other. "Rachel!" she called out, as if we hadn't spoken in months, which, to be fair, was almost true. "Isn't she beautiful?" She patted the car. "Lease special, 0 down, just couldn't pass it up." I looked at the soup in my hand. Dad said you were helping with his bills. She waved a manicured hand. Oh, that's still happening. Don't be dramatic, I've got it all mapped out. Anyway, important stuff. I'm planning Christmas dinner this year, like old times. The good old Langley holidays, remember? I remembered. Mostly the part where Vanessa smiled for everyone, while I filled water glasses and cleared dishes. It'll be big this year, she added, walking past me toward the front door. Lots of guests. Think curated, not crowded. She didn't notice when I didn't follow her in. I stood there for a while watching the sun reflect off her new car, wondering what curated generosity looked like. That night, David sat beside me at the dining table while I scrolled through the family finance portal on my laptop. I wasn't snooping. Vanessa and I technically shared access to Dad's health trust account, a relic of some well-meaning estate plan from years ago. David leaned in, pointed. There. A new transaction had posted that morning. Line item, Langley Health Fund. Transfer authorized by V. Langley. Amount $23,000. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. That's not for Dad's care, I whispered. David didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence, as always, said enough. Vanessa's holiday dinners always felt like auditions. This year, I didn't know I was walking into a performance review. There was a time when I thought she was simply charming. She had a way of lighting up a room that made people lean in, nod along, laugh just a beat too long. But over the years, I realized it wasn't charm. It was curation. Nothing she did was accidental. From the angle of her photos to the guest list of her brunches, everything had a purpose, and everyone had a role. When we were kids, she once told me, "Image is everything." I thought she was talking about clothes, but standing in my father's foyer that Christmas Eve, I understood she'd meant something else entirely. The house looked like a magazine cover. Silver garland wound around the banisters. Glass ornaments caught the light like droplets of ice. The dining table had been extended with an extra leaf and covered in a white linen runner I recognized from Sandra's wedding china set, now resurrected for another performance. Candles flickered along the buffet. They smelled faintly of eucalyptus and money. David and I had arrived 5 minutes early, out of habit. I wore a navy cardigan I'd found at a consignment store last month, one button replaced with a pearl that didn't quite match. David held a glass pie dish wrapped in a tea towel, the apple pie I'd baked that morning, still warm at the center. Vanessa greeted us with a high-pitched, camera-ready smile. She was in a red velvet jumpsuit with heels high enough to click against the hardwood. Her makeup was immaculate, glossed lips, sculpted cheekbones. She looked like she'd stepped out of an ad for luxury gift guides. "Oh, good," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "You brought dessert. We've got pumpkin from Whole Foods, but I figured someone might want something homemade." I smiled tightly. "It's apple. Dad's favorite." She tilted her head. "Is it? Huh, I thought he liked pecan." David said nothing, but his hand brushed mine under the pie towel. We followed her into the dining room where the place cards had already been set. Vanessa, of course, sat at the head of the table. Her fiancé, someone new, I assumed, was on her right. Gerald and Sandra across from them. David and I. We were at the far end next to the hallway and opposite the fireplace. I could feel the draft from the mudroom door each time someone opened it. Dinner began with a clink of glasses. Vanessa toasted family and future and thanked everyone for joining her vision for the evening. Dishes passed around, maple-glazed carrots, sourdough stuffing, turkey slices perfectly arranged like fan blades. Everything was polished, including the conversation. "Things are really expanding," Vanessa said at one point, her fork twirling through a kale and cranberry salad. "I'm launching a mentoring initiative next quarter for young women in tech, branding, career scaling, the whole package." "That's great," one of Sandra's cousins offered. "Is it part of your company?" "Sort of," she said. "I'm absorbing it into my platform. Personal brand alignment, you know." I didn't know, but I nodded anyway. Between bites, I watched her. Watched how she pivoted seamlessly between anecdotes. how she always made eye contact when delivering a punchline, how she looped every compliment back to herself, her choices, her timing, her instincts. She was magnetic, and the room responded accordingly. At one point, she leaned over to Dad and adjusted the collar of his shirt, laughing like he was the star of a homecoming photo. He smiled faintly, the way he always did when Vanessa took over. When dessert was served, small plates of pumpkin pie topped with factory-perfect whipped cream, David quietly placed our apple pie at the end of the buffet. No one touched it at first. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they were waiting for permission. Then, just as the hum of conversation returned, Vanessa lifted her glass again. Her smile stretched wider than before. "A toast," she said, "to love, to partnership, and to those who found it the old-fashioned way, and those who financed it." There was a pause, a subtle one, but enough. She was looking straight at me. David's hand tensed against the tablecloth. Dad glanced down at his plate. Sandra smiled awkwardly as if she hadn't heard it, or wished she hadn't. A few cousins chuckled politely. I didn't flinch. I smiled. The same way you smile when someone brings up politics at a wedding, and I didn't say a word, because words weren't what I brought this year. I excused myself quietly, folding my napkin and pushing back my chair. The hallway was cooler, quieter. I walked to the coat rack and slipped a slim black folder from my bag, leather-bound, unassuming, the kind of thing Vanessa would overlook entirely. When I returned to the dining room, I didn't say anything. I just sat down, placed the folder on my lap, and let the room settle around me. They didn't know yet, but they would. They expected a meltdown. I brought math. The room had softened after Vanessa's toast, though the laughter didn't quite return. People shifted in their chairs, refilled their drinks, commented on the weather and the roast, but beneath it all, something hung heavy, like a ceiling fan one screw away from falling. She thought she'd delivered the final word. She always did. David passed me the water pitcher. His hand brushed mine, and I didn't have to look at him to know he was ready. We hadn't rehearsed this. We didn't need to. There are some things a husband learns by proximity, when to speak, when to support, and when to let the silence carry weight. I placed the black folder on the table. My fingers didn't tremble, though my pulse thudded like a clock against the skin of my wrist. I undid the clasp and flipped it open, one page at a time. No clearing of throat, no preamble. I simply began. "Dad's medical expenses since last June," I said. "Imaging, physical therapy, follow-ups, prescriptions, all itemized." I passed the first packet toward Gerald. A few heads turned. The room hushed like a stage at curtain. "These," I continued, unfolding another stack, "are the bank records from my account. Payment confirmations. The total is $87,412.63, paid directly to Mission Hospital and associated clinics, between January and September of this year." I didn't look at Vanessa. She was still, eyes locked on the folder, jaw tight enough to crack glass. I pushed the last envelope forward. I didn't ask for help, and I didn't expect thanks. Gerald opened the first page. His eyes moved slowly, lips forming silent calculations. "I just wanted him taken care of," I said. "Quietly. That's how I do things." I let the words hang. Then I reached for the final document. "This," I said, unfolding a thinner slip, "is a copy of a vehicle purchase agreement, a white 2021 Tesla Model Y, leased and insured under Vanessa Langley, paid in full by the Langley Family Health Fund." There were gasps then, but soft ones, like someone knocking gently on glass. No one moved. No one reached for dessert. Gerald's hand hovered over the invoice. "Vanessa," he said, his voice low, brittle, "did you use Dad's health fund for your car?" Silence. Sandra blinked. "What is this?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, a slow, deliberate shift. "She's lying." I expected that. I'd anticipated every possible variation of denial, which is why I reached into the folder one last time. "This is a notarized summary from the bank that manages the trust," I said, sliding it across the table. Authorized transactions from the last 6 months. This one, I pointed, matches the Tesla invoice to the penny, and here, my finger landed just above the line, is your signature. Vanessa didn't respond. Her face stayed still, but her fingers twitched once at the hem of her sleeve. Gerald read the page, twice, then a third time. The room didn't breathe. David placed a quiet hand on my back, grounding me like an anchor. Gerald lowered the paper. He looked at Sandra, then at the rest of the table, then finally at me. Everyone, he said, standing slowly, out. No one moved. His hand rose just slightly. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. Rachel, he added, quieter this time, stay here. Chairs scraped against hardwood. Silverware was laid down in small, hesitant gestures. One cousin mumbled an excuse. Someone whispered, "Should we take our coats?" No one answered. They just filed out, leaving the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey hanging in the air like smoke after a kitchen fire. Vanessa didn't move at first. She just stared at the folder as if it might disappear if she held her gaze long enough. Then, slowly, she stood. Her heels clicked once. She didn't say a word, didn't look at me, just walked out of the dining room like a stage actress refusing to break character, even after the curtain fell. Sandra hesitated. Her lips parted like she might speak, but then she turned and followed her daughter. The door to the hallway closed behind them with a soft, final thud. I stayed in my seat, hands in my lap, eyes not on Gerald, but on the frost gathering along the edges of the dining room window, because I didn't need to explain myself. And finally, there was no one left demanding that I do so. Dad didn't speak until everyone had left. When he did, it wasn't loud. It was tired. The last guest had gone. The front door soft clicking closed behind them. The house exhaled with their absence, like it had been holding its breath for hours. Even the fire in the hearth had quieted to a low, slow burn, the embers crackling as if reluctant to give up the evening's performance. I sat in the same dining chair, hands folded in my lap. My plate was pushed aside. The folder now sat closed beside my water glass, its purpose fulfilled. In the hallway, I could hear Sandra's footsteps climbing the stairs, deliberate but distant. Vanessa's room door never shut. I assumed it was already closed before she reached it. David stood behind me, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. He didn't say anything. He rarely did when it mattered most. Gerald rose from his seat with a long exhale. He didn't look at me as he turned and disappeared down the hallway toward his study. A moment later, his voice floated back, not a command, not even an invitation, just my name, Rachel. I followed. The study hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Same dark walnut desk, same cracked leather chair. The floor lamp glowed amber in the corner, casting soft shadows across the old bookshelf stacked with outdated atlases and law books. Photos lined the walls, family portraits, graduation shots, one of Vanessa at a gala, wine glass in hand. I was there too, in a few frames, smaller ones. A passport photo tucked in beside a faded program from my first art show. Gerald stood at the cabinet pouring bourbon into 2 short glasses. He handed one toward me. I shook my head. He nodded as if expecting that and took a sip from his own. I thought, he started and paused. I thought Vanessa's success meant something. The way she talked, the way people watched her, it looked like achievement, like something to be proud of. He stared at the drink in his hand, like the answer might be floating inside. And you, he said, turning to the window, you never asked for much. Never made noise. I took that as comfort, that you were fine. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted him to keep going, but because I didn't want to interrupt the one moment in years when he seemed to be talking to himself more than me. She was loud, he said, so I thought she needed more. You were quiet, so I assumed you needed less. The wind rustled through the pine trees outside. In the dark, their shadows stretched long across the study walls, bending with each gust like the past trying to reach forward. He walked to his desk and opened the laptop, the glow of the screen cutting through the low light. With practiced fingers, he navigated to his contacts and clicked on a name, Judith Stern, attorney. The Zoom link loaded. A chime. Then Judith's face appeared on the screen, framed by a high bookshelf and a small desk lamp. "Gerald," she said, her voice calm and composed, "it's late." "I know," he replied, "but it needs to be tonight, before the year turns." Her eyes flicked over to the timestamp in the corner of her screen. "You're sure?" "I am." He motioned for me to sit beside him. I did, quietly, folding my hands in my lap. "I want to update the trust," he said. "Rachel is to be named sole trustee. Vanessa is to be removed from any financial oversight, immediately." Judith didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She'd been part of our family's legal structure for long enough to know the difference between drama and resolution. "I can send the digital amendment now," she said. "We'll notarize it in the morning. You'll need to sign before midnight." He nodded. "Let's do it." A few clicks. The document appeared on screen. Gerald scanned it, eyes darting over the lines, fingers twitching once at a familiar clause. At 11:54 p.m. he signed, his signature slow but steady. When he finished, he set the stylus down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen like it might disappear before it saved. Judith smiled gently. "It's done." "Thank you," he said, and ended the call. The silence returned, filling the room like fog. He closed the laptop, sat still for a long moment, then turned to me. "This doesn't make up for everything," he said, voice gravel-worn and soft, "but it's a start." I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't thank him. I simply exhaled slowly, for the first time in what felt like years. Sometimes the weight doesn't leave all at once. It rises, like breath, only after you realize you've been holding it. Vanessa found out on December 27th. The family lawyer had copied her on the updated documents. There were no warning texts, no calls before or after, just an email subject line she probably didn't expect to read. Re-amendment to Gerald Langley Trust. Final copy attached. I waited for the inevitable. It came 3 hours later, dressed in the usual uniform of performative civility. A long message, part apology, part accusation, wrapped in sarcasm sharp enough to cut through a padded phone case. "I hope you feel powerful now," it began. "This could have been handled privately, with maturity. But I guess some people need to humiliate others to feel relevant. Don't worry, I'm sure you'll manage just fine without a sister." I didn't reply. Sandra called the next day. Her voice, once crisp and directive, now drifted through the line like steam from a forgotten kettle. "I don't know what to think," she said. "Everything's so confusing." I paused, folding a dish towel in my lap. "So was I said. "For years." She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was only to say she hoped we could all just reset in the new year. I told her I was spending New Year's morning at brunch with David and some family friends. She said she might drop by. I didn't ask her to confirm. The morning of the 31st, snow fell in quiet curtains across Asheville. Our breath fogged the windshield as we pulled into the small inn on Chestnut Street. The parking lot was half full, pine trees along the fence draped in white, like someone had painted them just for the occasion. Inside, the room was warm. Brass fixtures, soft piano music, the smell of cinnamon buns and brewed coffee floating through the air. Gerald had already arrived, seated near the window, a linen napkin folded precisely across his lap. He greeted us with a nod, then returned to his menu. We ordered eggs, Benedict, hash browns, fresh fruit. Conversation stayed light. Weather, city construction, a new exhibit opening at the Folk Art Museum, and then she arrived. Vanessa swept into the dining room like the climax of a well-rehearsed entrance. Power white blazer, silk blouse, hair in a sleek bun. She didn't so much walk in as glide, like a woman determined to reclaim the narrative. A few heads turned, then turned away. She approached the table slowly, a ghost of her usual smile fixed in place. Gerald didn't look up. David sipped his coffee. "Happy New Year's Eve," she said to no one in particular. No one responded. She pulled out a chair near Sandra and sat, carefully smoothing the hem of her jacket. "Looks like you all started without me." No one apologized. The server came and offered coffee. Vanessa accepted it with a nod, too sharp to be casual. For a few minutes we all pretended nothing had happened, that she hadn't forged a transaction, that she hadn't lied to our father, that she hadn't tried to turn my life into a subplot for her own benefit. She cleared her throat, raised her glass of orange juice. "I just want to say something," she began. I kept my eyes on my plate. "This year's been complicated," she said, her voice steady but elevated, like a TED Talk introduction. "But I believe family finds its way back to each other, so to new beginnings." She lifted her glass a bit higher, expecting the room to rise with her. No one moved. Gerald didn't raise his cup. David didn't look up. Even Sandra blinked down at her napkin, tracing the edge with her fingernail. The only sound was the soft clink of my fork as I sliced into the eggs Benedict. The yolk broke cleanly, spilling a quiet yellow across the porcelain. Vanessa lowered her glass. 10 minutes later, she left. No hug, no goodbyes. Just the click of her heels fading down the hallway and the faint sound of the front door swinging shut. We stayed. We finished our meal. Emily Sharp, a friend from my grad program, sent me a text while I waited for the check. "Read the article. You okay?" I didn't ask which article. I just replied, "I'm okay." When David and I stepped outside, the snow had thickened. The world was soft with silence. We reached the car. He opened the driver's door. I moved to the passenger side, and that's when I saw it. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a plain white envelope, my name written in block letters, slightly uneven, familiar. I opened it there, in the cold, standing beside the car. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a notebook I remembered from years ago, Dad's old leather journal, the one he used to jot thoughts, ideas, reminders in the margins of crossword puzzles. One sentence, written in his careful, slanted script. "You were never invisible to me. I just didn't know how to look." The snow fell quietly around us. David didn't say anything. He didn't have to. For most of my life, I waited for recognition, for apology, for space. Now, I make space. March in Asheville always feels like a hesitant promise. The mornings are still crisp enough to see your breath, but by noon the sun warms the brick buildings and sidewalk benches until you stop needing your jacket. At the Art Center, our window boxes had finally bloomed. Pale yellow pansies and soft blue lobelia trailing over the edges like they'd been waiting too. Inside, the air smelled of clay and graphite, the kind of scent that settles in your clothes and hair but somehow never becomes unpleasant. My students were bent over their sketch pads, charcoal smudged on their fingertips, brows furrowed in quiet concentration. The workshop I was leading that morning was called Narrative Through Stillness. The title had been Emily's idea. I had wanted something plain, maybe drawing from life, but she reminded me that stillness could speak volumes, and people needed to be reminded of that sometimes. There were 12 of them, young, awkward, brilliant, in ways they didn't quite know how to name yet. First-generation college students, one who'd been told she wasn't commercial enough, another who'd been mocked for drawing figures without faces. I saw pieces of myself in every one of them, the version of me that used to draw in margins, say little, and wait too long to claim space that was already mine. David showed up halfway through class. He waved from the back, holding a slim package wrapped in craft paper and tied with twine. I raised an eyebrow. He grinned. When the class ended and the students filed out, some lingering to ask about scholarships, others just wanting to say thank you, I found him in my office, setting the package gently on my desk. "What's this?" I asked. "Early spring gift," he said. I opened it slowly, pulling away the paper. Inside was a wooden frame, oak, smooth and warm to the touch. Behind the glass sat a letter, lined paper, slanted handwriting. The same letter Dad had left on my windshield months ago. You were never invisible to me. I just didn't know how to look. I ran my fingers over the edge of the frame. David didn't say anything, but he was watching me with that soft, steady gaze I'd come to rely on like breath. Later that afternoon, as I was updating the student roster, my phone buzzed. Vanessa, one new message. You really think this is over? I stared at it for a second. Then I hit delete. I didn't need to read the rest. The world has a way of rearranging itself around quiet truth, even if it takes longer than it should. I no longer needed to explain, or justify, or wait. I hung the framed letter above my desk, just beneath a small shelf of ceramics one of my students had gifted me. As I stepped back to center it, the sun broke through the window and landed perfectly on the last line. Outside, two of my students sat on the front steps, sharing a sketchbook, pointing and laughing softly. Emily walked by with a cup of chamomile tea and winked at me through the glass. I used to think power came from being heard, but there's another kind, calmer, deeper, the kind that comes from not needing to raise your voice to feel full. The next time someone calls me the quiet one, I might just smile. I used to wait for people to see me. Now I see myself. And I'm not going back. Sometimes the hardest part isn't being overlooked. It's realizing how long you accepted it. But that spring, as sunlight touched the words my father once couldn't say, I stopped waiting to be seen and chose to stand in my own light. Families are messy, and love doesn't always look the way we expect. But when we find the courage to speak quietly and live truthfully, even the deepest wounds can start to mend. In life, healing doesn't always come with a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just a letter, a frame, and a door that stays open instead of closed. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear how you found your own voice or the quiet strength that helped you through. Feel free to share your thoughts or pass this along to someone who might need it today.